actually. But David does that, and I think if we can learn to do that, that's a very healthy way of dealing with difficulty. The second thing I see him doing here that I think it can help us, and it's not like his men, because he's standing out here, he doesn't give in to despair. That's the most difficult thing, isn't it? When it's all going wrong, it's so easy, isn't it, to just think, I just don't care anymore. I've had enough. Anybody here ever feel that way? I even feel that way at times as well. You're working with people, or I'm working with churches, or I'm working with students, or even if I look at my own life, I think, I just want to give up. It's just not working anymore. It's too hard. That's what his men were feeling. They were just to the point of despair. They thought, why would we want to do anything else? We've given everything, and what do we get in return? We get this. And when you get to the place of despair, then the first thing you do is you blame somebody else, don't you? And the nice thing is, we can always blame the government, because it's always their fault anyway, isn't it? But in leadership, nobody would ever want to be a leader unless God asked them to be a leader, because it's a no-win situation. You try to lead people, and then as soon as something doesn't quite go as expected, then it's your fault. Because we like to share our pain with others, don't we? We try to blame others. You see, the problem with blaming is, blaming only leads to discouragement and to further despair. That's all it ever creates. Now, I'm not saying there doesn't need to be accountability and justice. We've all blamed the bankers, and there's reasons for that, because they've been naughty, haven't they? Even recently. I just don't get it, really. Why on earth do we keep trusting the bankers? Because they keep doing these terrible things. And if you go right through people in society, whether they are church leaders, or they're bankers, or they're government leaders, or they're football managers, whoever they are, there's always these issues that are around. But notice David here, this has happened, but unlike his men, he doesn't give in to despair. Now that's a really good thing to learn, and a very hard thing to learn. So he's expressing his feelings, but he doesn't give in to despair. So the third thing he does here is he encourages himself in the Lord. And why does David do that? Because there's nobody else that's going to do it for him. None of his men are doing that. And sometimes, if you're a Christian, you may be the only Christian in your family, or the only Christian in your influence of friends. And sometimes the only thing you can do is to encourage yourself in the Lord. To say, God has not yet given up on me. I may have given up on me, but God hasn't given up on me. I may say this isn't going anywhere, but God hasn't said no yet. That's very hard to get your head around that, isn't it? I remember hearing a story about a man who visited a chap, and on his office desk he had this long word with a number of very unusual letters. He thought the man was Welsh, actually, because it looked like Welsh. And it had the letters PBP, GIFWMY. It sounds a bit Welsh, doesn't it, really? And he said to this bloke, what on earth does this thing mean? He says, are you Welsh? I don't understand this word. What does it mean? He says, no, it stands for, please be patient. God isn't finished with me yet. That's a good strategy, isn't it? God isn't finished with us yet. So, for David, there was no one else around. All his men were in despair. He was on his own. So what does he do? Instead of giving into the despair, the real tempting thing to do, he instead says, no, God's still at work here. He isn't finished yet, so I'm going to encourage myself. Because no one else can give me encouragement. Now, encouragement is a really powerful thing. Hugely powerful. It's very interesting that in the early church, every time they were church planting, particularly in the Apostle Paul, if you read about it, there's a bloke that shows up every single time to help him, and his name is Barnabas. And his name means son of encouragement. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I've been involved in a new initiative, I get discouraged quite often. I can get very depressed at times as well, because it's just hard work. You put your hand to something, and then 3 more things go wrong. You've ever get this experience? I'm sure you do. Anyway, what we need to do here is to see that he encourages himself in the Lord. Basically, he regains perspective. He changes his viewpoint. Instead of looking at his problem, he's looking to the problem solver. Instead of looking at the hole in the ground, if you like, he's looking at the person who can lift him out of the hole. That's what he's looking for. How can God make this work? My friend Zaya, the Indian pastor, he's got a lovely way of praying. I just wish I could pray like he does. He looks at a problem and he says, God, this is not my problem. This is your problem. I don't know how you're going to solve it, but it's your problem. I just think that's a lovely way to pray. So he said, oh look, we need £20,000 to do this. God, this is not my problem. I don't have £20,000. It's your problem, God. How are you going to solve it? I just think that's a really lovely way to pray. And that's sort of what David's doing here. How are you going to solve this, God? You know, we've been obedient to you. How are you going to solve this? So what happens next in the story? He then seeks new direction. The problem is, when you're low, when it's all going wrong, the temptation is to get stuck. But David knows that if they stay where they are, everything will come apart. It will all unravel. That will be the end of it. And it says in the text here, after that David found strength in the Lord, he goes to the priest and he says, bring me the ephod. And he uses the ephod, and I'm not sure how this works because I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but somehow they use the ephod to get direction from the Lord. It's a bit like us praying or asking for advice or something else. And that's what he does. For us it might be, we might read the Bible and a verse might jump out. That happens very regularly to people. I hope you don't read the Bible like one woman I heard about, where every morning she got up and she closed her eyes and she opened the Bible and she pointed at a verse. And thought, God's going to speak to me this way. So she did it one morning, she got up, closed her eyes, pointed to a verse, and the verse said, Judas went out and hanged himself. She was, well, I don't like that one. I'll try it again. So she kind of flipped through some pages and closed her eyes and pointed to a verse, and the verse said, Jesus said, go out and do likewise. She was, oh, I don't like that one either, actually. So she did it again, she flipped through the Bible and she found one more verse. She goes, this is going to be it. And it said, what thou doest, doest quickly. So maybe this is not the best strategy. But David found a new direction. And when you're at a low ebb in your life, when things are going wrong, you feel low, this is when we need to find new direction quite often. It pulls us out of the difficulty and puts our feet back on the firm foundation. We need godly counsel. And that's what David was seeking. So he expresses his feelings, he doesn't pretend, he doesn't give in to despair, he encourages himself in the Lord, he seeks new direction, and then the very last thing is, he talks about the whole thing out with God. He doesn't just think about it, read about it, strategize about it, but he talks it over. And he asks God, what shall I pursue them? What shall I do? Shall I pursue them? Will I overtake them? And the answer in the text, the Lord says, pursue them, you will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. That was the answer to that situation. That isn't the answer to every situation, by the way. You know, God could have said, no, don't pursue them. I've got another strategy instead. You know, maybe he might have said, rest a while, like he did with Elisha the prophet, who became, after his great encounter with the prophets of Baal, he became exhausted and depressed, and he was just empty, and what he needed was rest. And God said, don't do anything else, just go have a kip. Go have a holiday. That's what you need. And sometimes that's what you need, isn't it? But here, he says that there will be a good outcome, and that's what happens in the end. Now, this process David's going through, that we go through, I want to just give it a name. It's a bit of a cycle, and you go through it in life, and it's called orientation, disorientation, reorientation. Okay? So you're orientated to something. This is the way life is, or the way it's supposed to be. And then something happens. Health problem, lose your job, difficult children, difficult parents, difficult church members, difficult leaders, whatever it might be, and you become disorientated. You think, this doesn't fit, this doesn't square up. And then what we need then is a new orientation. So for David, the orientation was, I'm the servant of the Lord, I'm following what God asked me to do, and then he gets back to the city and everything's gone wrong. He's completely disoriented. This isn't what I signed up for. His men are in despair. And they don't even want to follow him, they actually want to kill him. It couldn't be any worse. And what we need then is we need to find a place of new orientation. If you read the story in the Bible of every single person, that's their experience. If you read the story of any Christian through history who's influenced anyone else, that's their experience. If we had time to talk to each person here today, my guess is that would be our experience. And that would be experienced together as a church. Going through a period of orientation, this is where we are, to disorientation, what do we do, to reorientation, this is how it can work. The late Bishop Leslie Newbigin was a missionary for many, many years as a missionary in India. Hugely